To prepare for the future of cities, try bartering. Try exchanging goods and services with people without money.
So barter is not a new idea. In fact, it's a really old idea. People have been bartering all over the world in all different countries organically for centuries. The internet has made bartering more convenient, more accessible, but it doesn't make it new. And in fact, it's not newness is why we think it's part of the future of cities. Barter is a time-tested idea. Trends, we feel, are often driven by this consumer culture where we're told that we need to get the new thing, whether it be a pair of shoes or a gadget or a big shiny idea. We need to get it right now. We need to run through it. We need to throw it away and get to the next new idea and never be satisfied. We don't barter because it's trendy. Although there has certainly been a lot of energy behind this idea of sharing in recent years. But that's not what attracts us to it. What attracts us to it is that it's how we've lived our lives for years and years, and we find it to be satisfying. So we're envisioning a future of cities where we're not driven by this consumer drive to get the new thing and throw it away, but rather we're driven by a depth of engagement with ideas or with people or with communities.
So barter is not an abstract model. It's not a blueprint for a better society where people will somehow behave well together because they're in this new model. Barter is a messy practice. It's something that people have been using to meet their needs for a long time. This is what interests us about it. When you step into the space of a barter, you have to talk about what your work is worth to each other. I write grants. How should I value this in a barter? Should I value it based on what I would get paid for it? Or should I value it based on how much time it takes? Should we trade time for time? Maybe I should value it based on how much fun I'll have and how much she needs it. Or maybe on how difficult it is, how tired I am when I'm done. This is what barter opens up, and it shows that it's not just a model, but it's a practice. It's a way to raise consciousness about value and labor, and this is really important to us. We want to make sure that in the future of cities, we don't just have consultants coming in to propose models to communities that they have no experience in themselves. We think it's really important to see cities as places where people have practices that we can honor, where people can be given power and resources to continue meeting their needs together.
So there's been a lot of conversation about this term collaborative consumption. And the collaborative consumption model offers some really exciting possibilities for maximizing our resources and reducing waste. And we're definitely interested in that. On the other hand, it's possible that the entire sharing space could get subsumed into the collaborative consumption model because the collaborative consumption model is a viable business model. It's monetizable, whereas a large part of the rest of the sharing space is not monetizable. So one thing that comes up with the idea of collaborative consumption is it becomes this interaction, this one-way consumer interaction, wherein I rent my neighbor my extra power drill, as opposed to a two-way ongoing transaction, where I lend my neighbor my extra power drill with the expectation of some kind of future reciprocity. We see the future of cities as in large part based in that expectation of future reciprocity, that ongoing two-way relationship. So we think, if this financial crisis hasn't given us an opportunity to question our consumer identities, then after we all have money again, aren't we just going to buy our own power drills? Isn't that what consumers do? So we envision a future of cities where this two-way relationship is really what we do with each other. And if we haven't questioned our consumer identities and we do all go back to buying our stuff, then what's really going to have happened is a bunch of VCs will have lost a lot of money, And we, as individuals, will have lost a really profound opportunity to reimagine our own identities and our relationships to each other.
So you might think, but barter is about on-the-spot transactions. I don't actually build relationships when I barter. We've realized since we've been running workshops and organizing this network for 4 years that a lot of people have images in their minds when we talk about barter. You might have been thinking, wait, are they going to talk about how sometime before we had currency, people were stockpiling chickens and stockpiling potatoes, and they'd go to some magical town square and haggle over the chickens and the potatoes to try and get as much as they could for themselves? And if that's not the image you had in your head, maybe it's something about financial collapse or governmental collapse. Maybe you imagine going out on the street with your family heirlooms. Maybe it's the ring that your dad gave to your mom just to get flour or eggs. These are things that David Graeber has interrogated really well, and we can question this myth because it tells us a story about ourselves that we don't want to accept. It says that when infrastructure fails, what happens is that we can't meet our needs together. We couldn't possibly do that because what we want at the end of the day is to compete with someone else and not help them. If you look at economic anthropology, and I've been very interested in Caroline Humphreys, what you find is that barters rarely happen on the spot. Barters are typically relationships of trust that happen over time. In order to have a barter take place, we have to have a dialogue. It's inherently social. Typically, I fulfill one end of the bargain and then wait for a period of time for the other side to be fulfilled. This means that it's a relationship, and it's very important to understand this when you think about barter in the future of cities. We're saying that you should take a moment and think about slowing down. Think about your neighborhood, not in terms of the cafe you know, where 1% of profits might go to someone somewhere that you'll never meet. Think of your neighborhood instead of a place with millions of skills and people who might respect what you do as much as you respect what they do.
The thing that's so interesting about this idea that we're self-interested is that we see in practice all the time that it's just not true. When we offer a space to people to open up, if we open up a space for people to say, this is what I need, this is what I have to offer, what's amazing is that they start helping each other and you cannot get them to stop. We often find ourselves in a situation where our workshop time is over, we have to give up the room, and we cannot get the people in the room to stop helping each other. That's the reality. This myth that we're all just self-interested is actually not what we find happens in practice. Now you'll have economists will often argue that this time that we spend finding out what we have to offer and what other people have to offer, they call it information cost. It's a cost of doing business. And their argument is that with barter, it's too high. It takes too much time to find out what other people need. We actually reframe that. We actually see it as an information benefit. Because what you have created in that time is a knowledge base of the abundance that is right in your immediate vicinity, the incredible skills, spaces, and objects that the people right around you have to offer. To us, that knowledge is intrinsically valuable beyond whether or not the exchange that generated the conversation actually happens. This is our communal resource. This is what we have with each other. And that to us is profoundly valuable. So we don't see it as a cost, we see it as a benefit. The other thing that's so interesting about that when you start having that conversation is that we can start seeing ourselves as valuable beyond just what we're getting paid to do. We're seen as value, we can see ourselves as having intrinsic value. And if we can see that in ourselves, then why could we not see it in our neighbors? And then if we're seeing it in our neighbors, really, why does it matter whether our neighbor is building software or providing childcare, or a retiree or a grad student, or a factory worker or unemployed? We start seeing each other differently. And this way of seeing each other we think is part of the future of cities.
So maybe you say, okay, barter sounds interesting, people help each other, but I don't have any needs. I'm fine. Someone else can barter. This usually happens in workshops, and what we've realized is that maybe you barter with a few people, but you're not sure about strangers, or you're not even sure about bartering at all. And usually this is because it feels incredibly vulnerable to say what you need. In our culture, and especially as middle-class Americans, we're told that success is self-reliance. It means making enough money so that you can buy help. You don't need to ask anyone for anything, and it makes two categories of people. We see people who have a lot of needs, and then people who have succeeded, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and who might be charitable towards these other people. This image of assumed need over here and success and self-reliance over here is something we want to do away with altogether. Imagine if you were in a city where you felt good asking for help because you knew that someone wanted to help you as much as you wanted to help them. Imagine a city where you could rely on other people outside of work. Imagine a city where people talked about how they helped each other meet their needs more than they talked about how they helped people outside of their neighborhood, outside of this room.
Another thing that comes up in our workshops that's so interesting is that people have a hard time stating what they have beyond what they get paid to do. So we want to try something for a second. Take out your smartphones. We're going to ask you to tweet what you have to hashtag our goods. Okay? So think for a second. Don't freak out. You have something to offer. So think for a second about what it is that you have to offer that is not now and never will be on your resume. What do your friends ask you to do for them? What's the thing that all your friends know you're good at? What do you love to do? What would you practically do for free because you like doing it so much? What do you want to learn more about by doing it? All of us have these skills in ourselves, and there are intrinsic value beyond what we get paid. Maybe you can juggle. Maybe your dad taught you how to make a race car out of a block of wood when you were a kid. Maybe you know how to hula hoop. Maybe you have some sports equipment in your closet that's just sitting there all the time. You hardly ever use it that you could lend. Maybe you work in a space that's idle for several hours a day that somebody else could take advantage of. These things are intrinsic value. No financial crisis can take those away from us, right? Those things can't be fired out of you. Okay, when the financial collapse happened, none of us in this room lost any of our skills, lost any of our intrinsic value when Lehman Brothers collapsed. All of our value stayed intact. We had a crisis of money. And there are so many other ways to unlock that value in ourselves if we're willing to have these conversations with each other. So this is not theoretical. We're asking you to do this. Think of something that you have to offer and tweet it to hashtag our goods. And we're going to see what is right here in this room. What's the neighborhood that's right here today at Galapagos?
So we have lots of skills and spaces and objects to offer one another. We can get a lot done together without money. This event, in fact, is mainly a generosity experiment. We're really excited about this because we see a future of cities that is not about individualism or maximizing pleasure and wealth. It's about community reliance. It's about doing things in the here and now together. So even if you didn't tweet right now, when we're done, turn to someone you don't know and ask them what they need or what they offered on Twitter. We're interested in seeing a city where people become vulnerable to one another because they're more interested in building relationships of trust and in learning how to communicate openly instead of just buying the next product. Imagine that it doesn't take a big model or a blueprint way on the horizon to find the space where you can finally be the way you want to be. Imagine that you can practice being the person you want to be right now. Thank you.